How young we are, how far we've come, and how quickly it has happened. Sunset Ridge School ends the century as one of the most respected, highly rated schools in the state of Illinois. And yet just 75 years ago, the children of Northfield had only a one-room schoolhouse. And just 75 years before that, there was no school at all, or a village. Only a small group of pioneer families struggling to carve a community out of the prairie, swamp, and woodlands a day's ride north of the city of Chicago. That's why any story of Sunset Ridge begins with the story of Northfield. The two grew up together. And today, as we celebrate the school's top-ranked status, we need to remember, it takes a village, too. The year 1857. There were only 20 families on the tax rolls of the entire district. Among them was Mary Young, an immigrant from Germany, who came with her teenage daughter named Mary, and Mary's bridegroom, Henry Brackendorf, looking for government land to claim. They traveled up the Green Bay Trail from Chicago in a wagon, and when they reached Winnetka, they turned west, away from the Lake Michigan shoreline. Henry staked his claim in a dense forest and cleared the land where Bracken Lane now runs. Eventually, their holdings would expand all the way down to Middle Fork School. Henry built a cabin, chinking the logs with mud. Then, after turning the woodland into farmland, he began to raise a family. But 9 years and 4 children later, Henry died. Young Mary, only 24, was left with 4 children under the age of 6, an acre of cleared farmland, a one-room cabin, an axe, and a rifle.
Mother rigged up a calico curtain in that log cabin. 2 of my brothers slept on one side, and my sister, mother, and I slept on the other. Our heat came from a wood stove, but there never seemed to be enough to make us warm. We used candles for light.
The family survived with the help of neighbors like John Happ, who arrived about the same time with his 9 sons and daughter. Happ, a blacksmith from Trier, Germany, first settled in Winnetka, where he ran a successful business until the railroad wiped him out. Then he, too, moved to the west. The old dirt road where Happ built his log cabin would become Happ Road. The Donovans lived south of the Happs and just east of the Brackendorfs, where Chapel Hill Lane is today. While the Brackendorfs were pig farmers, the Donovans raised chickens and cows. Mrs. Donovan smoked a pipe. Across the road was Charles Metz, another German who emigrated in 1861 and bought 13 acres where Somerset Lane now sits. The homesteader's life wasn't easy. They had land, but land didn't mean money. Everyone, including the children, farmed to make ends meet. Horseradish was the crop of choice, but packing hay was also popular, and every fall the Brackendorf boys would collect the straw for free from the Skokie Swamp. Charles Metz even tried pickle farming for a year. But it was still a hardscrabble life. At age 14, young Lucy Brackendorf hitched the family horse to a sleigh and traveled to Evanston, where she cleaned houses for $1 a week. She also worked for the Sewell family, caring for 11 children after a tragic accident killed their mother. In fact, Lucy never moved from Northfield, living most of her life in a home her brothers built for $90 in 1897, right next to the original log cabin. At the same time the settlers were staking their claims, the state of Illinois passed a law requiring local schools be formed. Soon, tax collectors started coming around in horse and buggies to round up the funds to build them. But paying taxes was not a priority for the farmers, and neither was school. When children were allowed to leave the farm, they trekked several miles to Northbrook or Wilmette for classes. The farmers left schooling to others. Winnetka, for example, elected their first school board in 1859 and hired their first teacher the same year. The first sign that a school might be built in Northfield was in 1863. was this handwritten deed filed almost 20 years later in 1878. John Brown, a farmer who lived where Sunset Ridge Country Club now stands, donated a quarter of an acre on the corner of Sunset Ridge and Willow. But it took until 1892 to open the Brown School, a one-room schoolhouse with no plumbing or electricity and a pot-bellied stove for heat.
The man across the street used to come and build the fire in the morning in the stove, and then by the time my father got there, the schoolroom was fairly warm, and then he tended the fire after that during the day.
There was a new teacher every year who usually boarded with the Donovans. Alex Lavergne, who lived on Hap Road, went to the Brown School in the 1890s. He recalled his favorite memory in a 1967 interview.
Old May Donovan, who lived next door to the Brackendorfs, had this cow that sometimes wandered off. I used to hunt it down after school with my friends. It would roam through the forests and swamps between Winnetka Avenue and Willow Road with a bell around its neck. We kids were always looking for that cow.
(1924), the Roaring Twenties. Chicago is a bustling city of nearly 3 million. Northfield is a sleepy farm town of 200, and the locals like it that way. But Samuel Insull doesn't. A British-born entrepreneur who viewed himself as the most powerful man in Chicago, Insull was known as a man of violent temper and a lover of intricate finance. A patron of the arts, he built Chicago's Civic Opera House, but that was just a diversion. As head of the Public Service Company of Illinois, one of the utilities that would someday become ComEd, Insull's real goal was to build a chain of small villages in the suburbs, all of which would buy their electricity from him. To attract people to these new communities, Insull built an electrically powered railroad so workers could commute back and forth to the city. A few months later, the Skokie Valley Electric Car Line pulled into the little unincorporated village with Insull in the front car. He now literally held the reins of power in town. He wasted no time using them. He and real estate promoter George Nixon started buying up land. Their intention was to subdivide lots near Best Hardware and Clarkson Park into hundreds of 50-foot parcels that could be bought for $10 down. Though his scheme eventually fell through, some of the model homes he built at Bosworth and Dickens still stand. Insull also knew that to lure people into buying land, you needed to formalize village services, services that up until now had been strictly volunteer. So he set about to make that happen. Suddenly, there were rumors that Winnetka wanted to annex Northfield for the land and the property taxes. Northfielders hadn't felt strongly about having a formal town, but they didn't want Winnetka to take over either. After a series of meetings, an election was held, and of the 78 votes cast, 63 were in favor of a new village. John Hap, grandson of the settler, became the first village president of Waubun. The name of the village was already a sticking point. The locals called their land Skokie Swamp after the natural beauty of the marshy lagoons and wetlands nearby. But Insull figured no one wanted to live near a swamp, so he organized a contest to name the new village. The winning name was Waubun, after an Indian word meaning dawn and a Potawatomi chieftain who lived in the area in the 1700s. The locals hated the name. One morning, as Insull arrived at the station, he noticed someone had changed "wa" to "hot" on the railroad station sign. Furious, he ordered his real estate man to come up with a new name. Northfield was the safe choice. In 1924, Northfielders took control of their children's education from the county and elected their first school board. District 29 was officially born, with 13 boys and 5 girls enrolled in the Little Brown School. Meanwhile, people were buying up property in Northfield. 10 Winnetka families purchased the land once owned by John Brown to build the Sunset Ridge Country Club. And further down the road, a wealthy family with 3 children bought property on Old Hunt. Dorothy and Harold Clark built a 9-bedroom mansion complete with swimming pool and manicured lawns. Beautiful, well-bred, and determined, Dorothy had studied at Bryn Mawr. Her father had been a college professor, so it didn't take long for her to decide that what Northfield needed was a new first-class school. Her plans took a giant leap forward when Louise Cray answered an ad and was hired as the Clark summer housekeeper. Louise was married to William Cray, the principal of the Northbrook School. But with 4 children to raise and a paycheck of only $150 a month, the Crays needed the extra income. When Dorothy met Cray, she was impressed by his nature, his love of kids, his commitment to education. In 1929, Dorothy convinced him to move to Northfield with the promise that she would build him a brand new school.
Mrs. Clark was very enthusiastic about this school, and my father became very enthusiastic and interested, and so that's how it happened. So then we moved over to the Clark's property. They had a farmhouse on their property that we moved into, that we would be in the district.
The Brown School was a step down for Cray. With 29 students, a 1-room building, and no supplies, he was the only teacher. His salary was $175 a month. Yet a sign of the high academic standards he would bring to the district was soon evident. That year, the Brown School took top honors in Cook County's annual spelling bee. Dorothy's next task was to build the school she'd promised Cray. It was not easy. The old-timers, the farm families, were against it, refusing to spend their hard-earned tax dollars on something as frivolous as a new school. A heated battle soon broke out, and both sides went door to door with their campaigns. At one point, the school board even locked the newcomers out of the school. But armed with both clout and money to invest in the village, the newcomers eventually won. A prominent North Shore architect was hired to build what became one of the most beautiful schools on the North Shore. And in September of 1930, Sunset Ridge opened its doors.
You walked into this beautiful hallway with carpet and a big fireplace. And then to each side, you had 2 big classrooms. Well, it was paneled, and it was very beautiful, and then each classroom had a great big bay window. And everybody thought it was gorgeous, and it was.
Once the new school opened, Cray was no longer a one-man band. In 1933, Betty Horseman, a native of Winnetka who loved sports and the outdoors, joined Cray to teach 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grades.
The kids loved him because he was absolutely firm on everything he believed, but a man that was a disciplinarian was his big forte because he did it so well, with an iron hand and a sweet, loving manner that was terrific. I was the opposite. I liked the music and fun things.
Together, the 2 teachers were a formidable team.
Mr. Cray was very stern, but he was a very good teacher. And I mean, I liked him very much. And Betty, the other teacher, well, she was just super. I can remember dancing in the hallway with her, and she was a lot of fun.
Betty's love of sports and sports cars helped get the school's athletic program off the ground.
We had a good baseball team. We'd pile all the kids in the back of my little Chevy in the rumble seat and on the top. No police ever found us. And we'd drive off to a couple of the local schools that were close by and play games.
But the Depression was closing in. Insull's empire collapsed, and times were tough. Everybody had to make do.
My family were vegetable farmers, and they used to grow all different kinds of vegetables, and we had a little vegetable stand out in the front by, which is now Old Willow Road. We went out in the field and I had to pick beans and bunch beets and carrots and all that kind of stuff. I mean.
By the end of the Depression, though, enrollment was growing and the student body had become more diverse. There were still plenty of farm kids, but more affluent, sophisticated families had moved into the area. Cray walked a delicate line balancing the needs of both groups. In fact, the old families, many of whom still lived without running water or electricity, continued to view the school as a luxury. It took more than a decade for Lucy Brackendorf to sell some of the family's lands so the school could expand. By 1937, Sunset Ridge was bursting at the seams, and the decision was made to send the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to the Skokie School in Winnetka, an arrangement which would last until 1954. But as Cray began his second decade at Sunset Ridge in 1939, the threat of war loomed.
Hitler was rising to power in Germany, and I remember him with the map showing us how he was moving into like Poland, and he said he's a madman. I remember my father standing, he's a real madman.
During the war, Cray faced a different battle. In 1942, a crippling stroke forced him to retire from teaching. Once again, Dorothy Clark took on the job of finding a new principal for Sunset Ridge. World War II. Whether on the front lines or at home, everyone sacrificed. Teachers were exempt from the draft, but one of them, getting his master's here at Northwestern, was, like a soldier, separated from his family. Gas was so hard to come by during the war that Harrison Collins couldn't make the drive 40 miles to his family farm in Naperville, so he stayed at the Y during the week. A year later, Collins was teaching in Glencoe when his boss told him about a superintendent's job at a small school in Northfield.
He said, it's just a little country school, but it's going to grow up around you if you go out there. So it sounded pretty good to me, and they would even pay me more money than I was earning in Glencoe. So I said, yes, I'd come out here.
Harry took the job in the summer of '44. Little did he know his first task would be a sign of what was to come.
Sam Skodacek, the janitor, and I remodeled that room. Well, it had been just a storeroom. We put down asphalt tile floor and some paneling on 2 different walls and made it into a kindergarten room.
During the early days, in fact, Harry was a jack of all trades. Besides teaching 3rd grade, gym, and music, he drove the bus, built a lunchroom, balanced the books, and brought the kids hot casseroles for lunch. The end of the war fueled the baby boom and the flight to the suburbs. Northfield was changing fast. The Metzes still ran their produce stand behind the school, and Lucy Brackendorf, now in her 80s, still lived on Willow Road. But the days of battles and lockouts at the Brown School were over. In 1948, villagers easily passed a referendum, and Sunset Ridge broke ground on its first expansion. 3 new classrooms for kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grades. A small gym was also added in the basement. These village newcomers, like those who preceded them, weren't afraid to make political waves either. In 1949, they wrested control of village government, electing as president the first in a line of suburbanites who would mold Northfield to their more urban image. Nowhere was the contrast more vivid than at the Willow Inn restaurant, where a sign now read, "Men must wear shirts." Despite the culture clash, there was one thing everyone agreed on. Former teacher Jim Clarkson, hired by Collins in 1949 to teach PE and art, explains.
Sunset Ridge School was certainly the heart of the community in terms of where good programs and fun things and great education emanated. And Harry was the man behind the school.
Collins capitalized on that. He enlisted parents who knew the Dewey Decimal System to set up the school's library. Others volunteered to run the school's art program. He encouraged the PTA to take a more active role, pioneering programs that still exist today. Collins also tapped into community talent to stretch the school's limited resources. A music lover himself, he recruited well-known musicians to create an innovative orchestra program.
The director of the Music Center, Herbert Zipper, actually conducted our orchestra. And he had studied in Vienna, and here he was putting up with our out-of-tune playing.
And in 1946, Collins helped the PTA launch the first school fair, which more than 50 years later still links the school and the community in a joint fundraising effort. The partnership Collins forged among parents, school, and community spawned other benefits as well. In the late 50s, a group of Northfield fathers concerned about uncontrolled growth were able to shelter 30 acres of village land from development. That land, shared in part by the school, became the home for the Northfield Park District, and Jim Clarkson became its driving force for the next 25 years. In fact, that spirit of cooperation, rare in any municipality, is considered a statewide model of government collaboration. But perhaps Collins' greatest gift was his ability to bring out the best in teachers. Mary Osborne, who joined Sunset Ridge in 1948, spent the next 40 years at District 29.
Harry was wonderful. He would come up with an idea, and sometimes we would just laugh and say, no, no, no. But then we would think about it, and later we would go back to Harry and talk about the things that he had come up with, and he'd always make us think that it was our idea, which was really fun.
It was just a beautiful place for a new young teacher to grow because they had no restrictions. They were allowed to create.
Through the 50s, Northfield's population surged and Sunset Ridge's enrollment nearly tripled. Even with 6 new classrooms and a gym, the school needed more space. At the time, the prevailing attitude in education circles was to separate out junior high students, to give them a school of their own. But Harry had a different idea.
Harry had great respect for little people. He felt, I think as most of us did, that if children got a good start in school, that they would do well from there on.
And so in 1959, Middle Fork School, one of the only schools ever designed and actually scaled for little people, opened its doors. Mary Osborne was the first principal.
Middle Fork was, I believe, the crown jewel of the village. It was something really special. I think that the small children always just felt so at home and so loved in that school. Oh, I think Middle Fork School was probably one of Harry's greatest legacies to the district.
Enrollment peaked in 1968 with 850 students at both schools. Programs that began in the 50s like social dancing, drama, and intramural sports flourished at Sunset Ridge. But Harry was still reaching for more. New programs and projects were continually unveiled. Special ed classes, author visits, field trips. At one point, Collins even turned the school blacktop into a mural. It wouldn't last. By the 70s, the baby boom crested and enrollment started to drop. Words like cost-cutting and downsizing began to be heard. At the same time, a conservative threat to Collins' liberal, experiential approach to learning started to sap the school's morale and energy. Harry Collins had spent 32 years building up the district, but he could not watch its decline. In 1976, he retired. It was the end of an era. Once again, the search for a new superintendent began, this time with the help of a national consulting firm. After looking at applications from across the country, the board's unanimous choice was Rod Lewis, a principal, ironically, from Highland Park, right around the corner. Lewis inherited a grim situation.
The real issue was money. We were confronted with cutting back art, music, and gym, and I think drama. And it became Dr. Lewis's job to do that, which isn't a very pleasant thing to do.
We really hit bottom at that point. The financial problems were great, the enrollment was declining, we had a new superintendent, and I think that we missed Harry.
Even with the cutbacks, these were dark days. At one point, the board considered closing both schools and merging with Avoca. But when villagers caught wind of the plan, They rallied.
It really did take a village to save the district at that time. The community pulled themselves together with the faculty and the board to do whatever it took to save the school.
That meant not only a hard line on costs, but also tapping new sources of revenue. Space at both schools was rented to the Park District, the nursery school, NSSED, anything, in fact, that was community or education oriented. It worked. The schools survived. But the turmoil took its toll on Lewis. His health failed, and he retired in 1983. Ironically, though, the cuts he made helped pull the school out of its slump. And once again, so did the village. More property was zoned commercial, and Northfield started to grow. With a larger tax base, there was now more money for education. Meanwhile, as the board geared up for another search, a young man hired in 1980 by Lewis took over as temporary superintendent. His name was Howard Boelting. Boelting grew up on the north side of Chicago, a few miles and a world away from Northfield. Early on, he had learned the value of a dollar.
One of my reputations here, even with my friends, is that I'm cheap, but I do not think I'm cheap at all. I think I'm very conservative, and I just think that I carefully analyze each and every dollar spent.
Boelting joined the district to support his family while he studied for his teaching doctorate. But when Lewis resigned, Boelting jumped at the opportunity and eventually won the job. His first act was symbolic. He moved his desk from the rear of his office and put it near the door. He could see out, and more importantly, everyone else could see in. Then the real work began.
I felt that just slowly over time that one's belief systems would become pretty obvious, and that people would learn to trust you and trust that you are constantly trying to make the right decisions for kids.
He also worked hard to put the school's finances on a sure footing.
We very carefully look into the future, 3, 5, 7 years, to ensure that we will have a sound financial base to operate our school systems. We hire teachers when we need to. We purchase materials when we need to. I never want to see what happened right before I came happen again.
Denny Morris, math teacher and assistant principal who had come during the Collins years, says Boelting met the challenge.
Howard just encompasses all the great qualities of both Harry Collins and Rod Lewis. He's a great teacher, he's a great observer, he's a tireless worker. There's just this incredibly close-knit atmosphere at Sunset Ridge that just I don't think can be duplicated anywhere else.
We have come into the Renaissance, I think. That Howard Boelting does a marvelous job, and I think he's in so many ways has just enhanced what the school had before.
Though teachers rely on his support and encouragement, Boelting insists they are the ones who really make it happen.
Everything we do centers around when a teacher closes her door or his door and starts teaching. That's what counts. And I believe there are great teachers out there, and you just have to find them.
He has. Boelting considers hiring his most important task, and he's recruited all but 2 of the teachers in the district. Linda Veith, principal of Middle Fork and assistant superintendent, recalls her first interview with Howard.
The interview that I had with Howard was like no other interview that I've ever had before. He spent most of the time out in the hall trying to help a student who was having a problem. That told me that he was really a hands-on kind of administrator, and I really felt that that was the type of environment that I wanted to be associated with.
Like Collins and Cray, Boelting solicits ideas from teachers and parents. That's how the extended kindergarten program got underway.
Teachers and parents from other school districts and communities call us fairly often to come and observe our program and to learn more about it. We've been told that it's one of the finest kindergarten programs they've ever seen.
That's also how the special ed program expanded. And in the case of Eagle's Song, it's taken students all the way to the White House.
You take suggestions for improvement from wherever they come. And if it's better for kids, you do it. And if you have everybody on the same plane, the same page, which I believe we have here, you become really, really good over time.
And we have, say a number of graduates, some of them parents of Sunset Ridge students today.
It's almost like having your own little private school that's actually a public school in a public school district.
I think it's the family atmosphere of the school, and that there are so many different things that you can choose from to be good in.
You meet teachers who you know for 5 years, and you form relationships with them that literally can last a lifetime.
There's a sense of community that's very important for children, that they have other adults that are invested in them and caring about them, guiding them. And you just get that feeling here that everybody cares about the children.
A sense of community. That is what created Sunset Ridge and what sustains it. A community of immigrants which grew until hand-hewn cabins had given way to farmhouses, and there was a village in need of a school. And what a remarkable school. Born 75 years ago in a one-room schoolhouse boasting the county's championship spelling team. It seems so long ago, and yet like yesterday. Because although times have changed dramatically, the values of community are timeless. It took a village, and it still does.
Being the superintendent's son, it was like an extended family. For several years, my brother was here, and even my mother was working in the office as an unpaid secretary.
What I really remember about Sunset Ridge are the extracurricular activities. I remember social dancing with having to wear white gloves and being a cheerleader.
I've got 5 girlfriends that I've been friends with since third grade, and that's very special, and those friendships will remain intact for the rest of my life.
The musicals and the plays and the solo ensembles and the dance recitals and everything like that, those were really fun.
What I'll really take with me and will make it the hardest part about leaving is the family atmosphere, all the friends I have here.